Snow whispered across the plains like breath against glass, thin and endless, swallowing the horizon into pale oblivion. The light was fading fast. It had that bruised violet hue that comes only at the edge of night, when the last warmth of the sun retreats behind the hills and the cold grows bold enough to bite. Along a lonely trail, a woman moved through that hush, small, bent slightly forward, her hands clutching the edges of a thin shawl. Her name was Lien Mei, though few in this country had ever said it right. Each step sank deep into snow, filling the prints she left behind. She had walked since morning, driven by something older than courage, something closer to need. Behind her, a gray thread of smoke rose from the last cabin she had begged at, where a man had closed his door before she'd even finished speaking. His words still echoed in her mind like metal striking stone. "We don't keep your kind here." She hadn't cried. She'd simply lowered her head and turned toward the open land, where cold and silence made no judgments. The wind thickened. The world around her grew ghostly, its color draining until it was all shades of white and dusk. Her legs trembled. Her breath came shallow, thin ribbons that dissolved before reaching her eyes. The hem of her dress had frozen stiff, the fabric crackling when she moved. And still she walked. The trail curved toward a scatter of cottonwoods and a faint glimmer, a light swinging from a porch. The cabin looked half asleep, smoke curling from its chimney, the kind of place that smelled of wood and bread and solitude. She hesitated, half afraid to hope, half aware that one more rejection might break something inside her that could never mend. But her fingers were too numb to think long. She crossed the yard and lifted her hand to knock. The door opened before she touched it. Jonas Hale stood framed in the warm light, tall and broad, with eyes that held the steadiness of a man who'd learned to live with silence. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hands rough from work, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the hearth burned steady, the glow brushing the edges of a plain wooden table and the shadow of a chair rocked halfway forward. Lien Mei tried to speak but her lips wouldn't part right. A sound came out, half a whisper, half a plea. "I'll freeze to death outside." He didn't answer. He just stepped aside. She crossed the threshold and felt the heat wrap around her like mercy. Her knees gave out and he caught her by the arms, steadying her without words. The door shut behind them, sealing out the howl of the wind. For a long moment, only the hiss of the fire filled the space between them. Jonas set her near the stove, fetched a blanket, and draped it around her shoulders. He poured water from a kettle and placed the cup in her hands. Steam rose, fogging the edges of her vision. She murmured thanks, though she wasn't sure if he heard. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of patience that comes from a man used to taking care of wounded animals, not people. Outside, the storm thickened until the windows rattled. Inside, time softened. When she finally looked up, she found him studying her quietly, as if trying to read a story written in a language he'd never seen. His face was neither hard nor kind, only present, like the land itself. "You came far?" he asked at last. She nodded. "From east of the ridge." Her voice was faint, her accent slipping through like a hidden melody. "No more wagons passed there." He seemed to understand more than her words. He nodded toward a small loaf of bread on the table. "Eat." She obeyed. Each bite thawed her a little more, though shame pricked at her with every swallow. She didn't belong in this warmth. She could feel it, the weight of being foreign, unwanted, something between curiosity and sin. Jonas returned to his chair by the fire, boots crossed, arms folded. He didn't ask questions. Didn't look at her long. That quiet mercy unsettled her more than cruelty might have. At length she said, "Thank you, Mr. Hale." Jonas Hale. "I'll leave in the morning," she added quickly. "I won't trouble you." He didn't look up. "You'll leave when the storm stops." Something in his tone made her chest ache. Not authority, not pity, just plain truth. As if he'd decided she would survive and that was that. The hours passed slow. The fire popped, throwing sparks that danced like small stars. She found herself staring at his tools on the wall, the lasso, the worn saddle, the rifle resting by the door. Evidence of a man who lived by necessity. There was no sign of another life here. No woman's shawl, no second cup, no laughter hidden in corners. She wondered what had emptied him out this way. When he caught her gaze, she looked down quickly but he said nothing. Outside, wind moaned through the eaves and somewhere a branch cracked under snow. He rose, checked the latch, then stood at the window watching the white swirl beyond the glass. "Late winter's the cruel kind," he said softly, almost to himself. "Looks calm till it kills." She nodded, understanding more than he knew. The storm kept them trapped in silence. She drifted between wakefulness and dreams, her body remembering hunger and flight. Once, she woke to find him draping another blanket over her. She feigned sleep, too shy to thank him aloud. By morning the storm had not eased. Frost edged the window panes, delicate as lace. Jonas was already outside, splitting wood. Each swing of his axe echoed through the stillness. She watched him through the window, the rhythm, the restraint, the strange comfort of his presence. It struck her then how far she'd fallen to find safety in a stranger's shadow. When he returned, snow dusted his shoulders like ash. He met her eyes briefly before brushing past to hang his coat. "Coffee's on the stove," he said. "Help yourself." She poured for both of them without asking. When he took the cup, their fingers brushed, a spark so small she almost thought she imagined it. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended in that fragile quiet, two people joined by circumstance, not promise. Then a sound came from the distance, a horse, a voice, the low clang of metal on wood. Jonas turned sharply toward the door, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Stay inside," he said. Through the window, she glimpsed the rider before the snow swallowed him. A man she recognized by the slope of his shoulders, the cruel slant of his mouth. Elias Crane. Her breath caught. He had found her after all. Jonas stepped onto the porch, the door swinging half shut behind him, and the cold rushed in again, thin, sharp, and merciless. Lien May pulled the blanket tighter around her and stared at the wavering light, heart trembling. For the first time since crossing the ocean she was not running, yet the storm outside felt safer than what waited beyond that door. Morning came faint and white, the kind of light that barely reached through the frost-glazed windows before being swallowed by cloud. The storm had quieted, leaving behind a silence that pressed close against the cabin walls. Lien May woke to the soft rhythm of chopping outside, the steady fall of an axe through wood, deliberate, unhurried, sure. For a moment she lay still, watching her breath fog into the pale air above her. The blanket Jonas had given her was heavy with warmth, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. She rose carefully, her limbs aching from the cold that had seeped into them days ago. The cabin was simple but tidy, a single table, a few chairs, a shelf lined with jars of beans and dried meat. Everything in it felt purposeful, as if chosen to survive rather than to impress. When she touched the kettle on the stove, she found it still warm. She poured a little water into a tin cup and sipped, tasting iron and ash in something that felt almost like safety. Outside, Jonas swung the axe again. The sound carried through the still air like a heartbeat. She stepped to the window, half hidden behind the curtain. His breath came out in clouds, each strike sent wood splitting neatly apart. His movements had the rhythm of a man who had lived long without needing to speak much. Someone who had made peace with solitude or perhaps been punished by it. She wondered which. By the time he came inside, snow dusted his shoulders. He looked at her with mild surprise, as though he'd half expected her to vanish overnight like a dream. "You're awake early," he said, setting his gloves down. She hesitated, unsure if she should speak. "The sound?" she murmured. "I thought it was thunder." "Just work." He poured water into the kettle again. The quiet between them was not empty. It was a strange kind of balance, like two unfamiliar songs learning to share a melody. Lien May moved to the table, her hands restless. "I can help," she said softly. "With cooking. Or cleaning." Jonas shook his head. "Rest. You nearly froze to death last night." "I can't sit while someone feeds me," she whispered. He met her eyes then, something steady and unreadable flickering there. "Then start with coffee," he said simply. She busied herself at once. Her hands trembled from weakness, but she found comfort in motion. When she handed him the steaming cup, he accepted it without thanks, yet with a quiet nod that meant more. He drank slowly and they both listened to the crackle of the fire. After a while he asked, "You got kin somewhere?" Her face tightened. "Not here." He seemed to understand that meant not anywhere. The day drifted slow. She swept the floor, mended a loose curtain edge and found a rhythm in the soft creak of the house. Every now and then she caught Jonas's eyes on her, not with hunger or suspicion, but with the quiet study of a man trying to fit her presence into a life that had no place for surprises. By afternoon, the sky dimmed again, the storm rebuilding its voice on the horizon. Jonas hitched his coat and went to stable the horse. From the window, she watched him move through the gray light, a dark figure against the frozen world. She envied the ease with which he belonged to this land, how even the cold seemed to respect him. When he returned, she was stirring a small pot of broth over the fire. The smell of ginger and wild herbs filled the room, faint but new. He paused, sniffing the air with faint disbelief. "Didn't think I owned anything that smelled that good," he said. "It's nothing," she replied. "Just something I remember from home." He sat taking a bowl. "Where was that?" "Far across the water," she said quietly. "A place where winters were kind." Jonas didn't press further. He ate slowly, the warmth easing something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. For a brief second, his mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like a shadow of one. It startled her with its gentleness. Evening crept in again, and with it came a visitor. A knock sounded at the door, brisk, sharp. Jonas stiffened. He opened it to find Myrtle Garrison, the town midwife and keeper of gossip, bundled in furs. Her eyes flicked over Lien Mei with the practiced curiosity of someone collecting new stories to tell. "Jonas Hale," she said, voice honeyed and sharp. "Word travels fast. Folks say you've taken in company." Jonas's jaw tightened. "Storm doesn't ask what color a person is before it kills them." Myrtle sniffed, glancing at Lien Mei's small frame near the stove. "Still, tongues will wag. You might want to think how it looks." "I don't think on what doesn't concern me," he said evenly, and shut the door. The silence afterward was heavy. Lien Mei stared into the fire, her cheeks burning. "She's right," she whispered. "People will talk. It will bring trouble for you." Jonas leaned his hands on the table, studying the grain of the wood. "They already talk," he said. "They've been talking about me for years." "What did they say?" "That I was better off alone." "Maybe they were right." He looked up then, meeting her eyes. "Until now." The words hung in the air like smoke, fragile and fleeting. He turned away first, tending the fire as though it needed him. Later that night, a faint scratching came from the door. Caleb Thorne, a boy from a nearby ranch no older than 10, peeked in, cheeks red with cold. "Mr. Hale," Ma said, "we're near out of kindling." Jonas fetched an extra bundle. Lien Mei knelt beside the boy, tucking his scarf tighter. "You shouldn't walk alone in this weather," she said softly. Caleb blinked at her accent but smiled. "You talk funny, ma'am." "She's from far away," Jonas said quietly. "Show respect." Caleb grinned and nodded. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, ma'am." Then, almost shyly, "You gonna stay long?" Lien Mei's smile faltered. "That depends on the storm." After the boy left, Jonas watched her trace circles on the table with her fingertip, lost in thought. "He liked you," he said. She shook her head. "Children don't see the things adults do. They just see kindness." "Maybe that's why they see clearer," he replied. The wind rose again, whistling through the cracks. The fire dimmed, and she moved to add wood, her movements graceful, quiet. Jonas watched the glow reach across her face, soft, steady, unassuming. Something in him stirred again, dangerous in its simplicity, the feeling of wanting another soul to stay. But he also saw the fear behind her calm, the way her eyes darted to the window as if the world still waited outside to claim her back. When she finally spoke, it was so faint he almost missed it. "Men like him don't stop," she said. "Elias." She nodded. "He'll come again. Men like that always come back when they think you owe them something." Jonas's hand clenched around the mug he held. Outside, the wind struck the door once, twice, like a warning. He looked at her, small, trembling, yet holding herself upright with every ounce of strength she had left, and something final settled in his eyes. "Then he'll find I'm not the kind of man who opens his door to take what isn't his," he said. And as the fire flickered against the frost-dark window, the faint shadow of a rider passed across the snow, unseen but certain, moving closer through the quiet white. Night folded over the plains again, heavy and watchful, its silence broken only by the restless hiss of snow tumbling off the roof. Inside the cabin, the air had gone still enough to hear the faint ticking of wood cooling in the stove. Lien Mei sat near the fire with her hands cupped around a mug, the glow painting soft amber against her face. She looked smaller than she had before, like the warmth might slip through her fingers if she wasn't careful. Jonas sat across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes, the sound steady and low, a heartbeat for the quiet. Neither spoke for a long while. The storm had thickened again outside, burying the world in white. In that hush, every sound carried weight, the crack of a log, the creak of the rocking chair, her small breath when she sipped her tea. It felt, for a moment, as though the world had narrowed to the space between them. Lien Mei broke the stillness first. "You should not have spoken to the midwife that way," she said quietly. Jonas looked up, the light catching in his eyes. "I said what was true. Truth makes enemies faster than lies." He paused, setting the knife aside. "You speak like someone who's had to survive among both." She stared into her cup. "I used to believe kindness was a language everyone understood. Then I learned that it depends who is speaking it, and who is listening. The fire popped, sparks flaring and falling. Jonas watched her carefully, wanting to ask more but knowing she was offering what she could. Her accent bent around her words like silk over iron, fragile but unyielding. Elias Crane, he said softly, tasting the name like something bitter. He hurt you. Her shoulders stiffened. He took what wasn't his to take. My work. My name. My peace. She drew a trembling breath. Men like him do not need to break things. They only need to own them. Jonas's jaw flexed. He won't own you now. She looked up then, not grateful, not yet trusting, just searching his face for a crack, a lie, some sign of what kind of man he truly was. You don't know what it costs, she murmured. I don't, he said. But I've lost enough to know when something's worth keeping safe. The words sank between them like a stone in deep water. He rose from the chair, moving to the window. Beyond the frost, the night glowed faintly under the snow, endless and empty. For years that emptiness had been his companion, the kind that never asked questions. Now it pressed at him differently, not as loneliness, but as a reminder that he was no longer the only soul under his roof. Behind him, Lien May's voice came again, softer. Do you ever regret staying out here? Alone. Jonas turned, his face shadowed by the flickering firelight. Every man tells himself solitude is strength, until he realizes it's just a slower kind of dying. She didn't reply. Her eyes glistened in the dim light, not with tears but with something like recognition. Later, when the wind began to howl, Jonas stirred the fire higher and set more wood beside it. Tomorrow, he said, I'll take you into town for supplies. You can walk in daylight without worry. Her fingers tightened around her cup. People will look. They already do, he answered. Let them see something they can't talk the fire out of. A ghost of a smile tugged at her lips. You speak like a preacher. He gave a small grunt. I've buried too many to preach. They fell silent again, but the quiet was different now, a thread pulled taut between two lives stitched together by accident and choice. By dawn the storm had weakened. The sky wore the color of ash. Lien May wrapped herself in the coat Jonas offered, its weight too big for her but warm. The snow outside was deep enough to hide the path, forcing them to walk close. Jonas led the way, breaking through drifts, and she followed in his steps. The world smelled clean like ice and pine. For a time neither spoke. The sound of their boots against the crusted snow became its own rhythm. When they reached the edge of town, heads turned. Faces in the general store window paused their motion, eyes narrow with curiosity or contempt. Myrtle Garrison stood outside, arms folded, watching with that sharp satisfaction gossipers wear like jewelry. Jonas ignored them all, guiding Lien May to the store door. Inside, warmth met them again, but it was not the same kind as home. Whispers flickered behind shelves. The clerk's smile froze when he saw her. What can I do for you, Mr. Hale? He asked too loudly. Flour. Salt. Candles. And she needs thread and needles, Jonas said. The clerk hesitated. We're short on some items. Maybe best She'll take what's left, Jonas cut in, his tone even but carrying weight. Lien May stood still beside him, eyes lowered. She could feel the room's air thicken, not from heat but from judgment. When the clerk turned away she whispered, You shouldn't do this. I don't do it for them, he said. On their way out she stopped near the door, her reflection caught in the glass, small, foreign, out of place. She touched the frost with her fingertips, leaving a faint outline that vanished instantly. That night, back at the cabin, the quiet between them was heavier. She sat by the fire again, sewing a tear in Jonas's coat. He watched her hands move, patient, precise, uncomplaining. Why do you help me? She asked softly. He thought for a long time. Because nobody helped me when I needed it most. And I swore if I ever saw that look again in someone else's eyes, I'd do different. What look? The one that says they don't expect anyone to come back. Her needle paused. She looked up slowly, and for the first time she smiled without hesitation. It was small, trembling, but real. Jonas felt something shift in him then, not sudden but deep, like spring thawing the roots beneath the snow. Outside the wind picked up again. A distant neigh carried across the valley, one horse, maybe two. Jonas rose, crossing to the window. Through the dim light, he saw movement near the treeline. Shadows where no man should be at this hour. He reached for his rifle, checking the chamber. Lien May's voice came softly behind him. He's here. Jonas didn't ask who. He already knew. The horse's cry echoed once more, followed by the low thud of hooves sinking into snow. Jonas felt the air change, colder, sharper. He looked at Lien Mei. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were steady. "Go inside the room," he said quietly. She didn't move. "If I hide, he'll think he can take me again." Jonas's grip on the rifle tightened. The firelight painted his face in harsh gold. "Then he'll learn this isn't the same storm he left you in." The sound of boots in the snow grew closer, deliberate, patient. Lien Mei stood by the fire, her hand trembling around the needle still threaded with white string. She whispered something in her own language, soft as prayer. Jonas stepped to the door, the rifle low at his side, his breath slow and even. The knock came, 3 heavy strikes that shook the wood. Jonas met her eyes once before opening it, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Lien Mei didn't feel cold at all. The door groaned open beneath Jonas's hand, and cold air spilled into the cabin like a ghost reclaiming its space. Snow clung to the boots of the man standing outside, Elias Crane, his smirk sharp as the wind. His eyes slid past Jonas, landing on Lien Mei by the fire, her small frame haloed in orange light. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the moan of winter and the brittle crack of the fire behind them. "Well," Elias drawled, tugging off his gloves one finger at a time. "Ain't this a sight? I figured you'd run farther, girl. Thought you had more sense than to crawl to another man's doorstep." Jonas's body stiffened. "You need something?" Elias tilted his head, the corner of his mouth curling. "You could say that. She owes me work and I came to collect. Pretty thing like her shouldn't sit idle while decent men break their backs." Lien Mei rose slowly, her face calm but her eyes shadowed with dread. "You don't own me, Elias," she said, voice low but steady. He laughed, a sound slick with cruelty. "You're forgetting your place, sweetheart. Out here, debts are paid one way or another." Jonas stepped forward, his voice measured, almost quiet. "You best leave now." Elias's grin faltered, just a flicker. "You got a big heart for a woman that ain't yours, Hale. I'd think twice before crossing someone who knows how to ruin reputations." Jonas's jaw flexed. Reputation's a word cowards used to scare better men. The tension in the air thickened. Outside, the horses shifted restlessly, breath fogging in the lantern glow. Lien Mei stood still as glass, her pulse thrumming under her skin. The firelight wavered, throwing the 3 shadows long and wild across the walls. "Tell you what," Elias sneered, taking a step inside. "You hand her over and I'll forget you meddled." Jonas didn't move. The silence that followed felt carved from stone. Then his voice came, soft and lethal. "Get off my land." For a heartbeat, Elias saw something in Jonas's eyes, not rage but a deep, unwavering resolve. It was the kind of quiet that didn't need noise to promise violence. He spat into the snow, muttered a curse and stepped back. "You'll regret this, Hale. She'll bring you nothing but ruin." Jonas shut the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. The echo lingered long after Elias rode away. When he turned, Lien Mei was trembling. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered. "He'll come back with others. He's not the kind of man who loses and forgets." Jonas removed his coat and set it on the chair, his expression unreadable. "Let him come." She looked at him, disbelief softening into grief. "Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know who I am." He crouched near the fire, feeding another log into the flames. "Don't need to," he said. "I know what it's like to be left out in the cold, waiting on mercy that never comes." The words struck her harder than any defense could. She turned away, staring into the fire until her vision blurred. "Mercy is for the strong," she murmured. "The rest of us just try to live long enough to deserve it." Jonas didn't argue. He only watched her, the reflection of the flames dancing in his eyes. There was a stillness to him, the stillness of a man who'd carried grief until it became part of his spine. The storm outside grew restless again, brushing snow against the window like fingers. Lien Mei sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "They won't stop," she said. "People like him always find ways to make you pay." Jonas stood and walked to the window, his broad shoulders dark against the dim light. "Then I'll make sure they regret the cost." Something inside her faltered. "You talk like you've fought before." "I have," he said simply. "And I lost what mattered." Her eyes lifted. "Who?" He didn't answer for a long time. The fire popped, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the quiet of buried memories. "My wife. Winter took her. Fever came fast and the doctor didn't make it in time. I buried her behind this cabin. Haven't spoken to God since." The air between them tightened with sorrow, old and shared. Lien Mei's throat ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once, not in acceptance but acknowledgement. She deserved a man who could save her. "I wasn't that man." Maybe it's too late to be one for anyone. You already are, she said before she could stop herself. The words hung trembling between them. Jonas turned to her slowly, eyes dark as wet earth. The weight of her gaze didn't break. It lingered, two wounded souls staring through the spaces grief had hollowed. He took a step closer, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots. You should rest, he said softly. But neither moved. In that fragile quiet, Lien May felt something shifting inside her. Not the pull of romance, not yet, but the first tremor of trust, the kind that roots itself beneath fear. When she finally lay down, she didn't sleep. Her dreams were restless, half filled with the sound of boots crunching through snow. She woke before dawn, heart racing, convinced she'd heard someone outside. Jonas was already by the door, rifle in hand. I heard it too, he said. They stepped out together. The world was pale and still, the snow reflecting the dim blue of morning. Then Jonas saw them, tracks, fresh and deliberate, circling the cabin like a wolf's path. He crouched, touching the prints. 2 men. Maybe 3. Her breath quickened. He came back. Jonas straightened, his jaw set. Let him come all the way. By midday the sky darkened again. The town's unease had reached their porch. A courier brought word that Elias had been stirring talk at the saloon, spreading lies of theft, seduction, and worse. Jonas burned the letter in the stove without reading it twice. They'll believe him, Lien May said quietly. They always believe the louder voice, he replied. But truth doesn't need volume. She turned to him, tears catching light on her lashes. And if they come for me? Then I'll be the one they find first. Something fragile broke open in her then. You'll ruin yourself, she whispered. Maybe, he said. But I've been ruined alone before. This time I'll stand for something worth the ruin. The storm began again that night, snow sweeping sideways across the plains, thick and furious. The fire roared high, a defiant blaze against the dark. Lien May sat near it, hands trembling as she threaded a new hem on her torn sleeve. Jonas watched her from the chair opposite, silent, steady, the kind of man who could carry a storm without raising his voice. Outside a dog barked once. Then came the faint, chilling echo of laughter, too far to see, too close to ignore. Jonas rose, checking the rifle once more. Lien May's voice barely reached him. What if he kills you? He looked over his shoulder, the firelight catching the faint scar across his jaw. Then he'll learn ghosts don't scare easy on this land. A gust rattled the window, scattering ash through the air. Lien May stood, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, her breath trembling. Jonas moved toward the door, listening to the wind for any shape that wasn't nature's. And then, faint but certain, came the sound of boots breaking through snow, closer this time, deliberate, unhurried. Jonas lifted the latch. Lien May's hand caught his sleeve. Their eyes met, hers filled with fear, his with the steady fire of a man who'd already decided what kind of ending he'd die for. The door creaked open, and somewhere out in the white, a man's voice called his name. Snow fell thicker than smoke, blanketing the land in silence that felt older than sound. Jonas stood just inside the door, rifle steady, the cold air curling around his boots. The voice outside came again, low, mocking, Elias Crane calling his name as if it were a game. Jonas Hale, he drawled, you got something of mine? Thought I'd come reclaim it before the snow buries her for good. Lien May stood behind Jonas, clutching the edge of the table. Her heartbeat was loud enough to feel in her throat. Jonas glanced back once, eyes calm, the faintest flicker of warmth in them. Stay behind me, he said softly. He opened the door fully. Wind roared in, carrying flakes that caught the firelight and turned to sparks midair. 3 riders waited in the yard, their horses stamping restless circles into the drifts. Elias sat at the front, grinning, his breath white against the dark. Behind him, 2 men held rifles across their saddles. Jonas stepped out, the snow crunching beneath his boots. You came a long way just to humiliate yourself, he said. Elias laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. You think this is about pride? That woman belongs to me. I fed her. Gave her work. She left owing more than she could pay. She left, Jonas said simply. That's payment enough. Elias dismounted, boots sinking into the snow. You really think you can play hero, Hale? The town already thinks you're mad. You hide her, you're finished here. Jonas didn't answer. His silence was heavier than any curse. He lifted the rifle slightly, the metal glinting in the dim light. Lien May stepped into the doorway then, unable to stay hidden. The wind pulled at her hair, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. You don't own anyone, Elias, she said. Her voice shook, but the words came clean. You made promises you never meant to keep. You gave cruelty and called it charity. Elias's face twisted. You think anyone will believe the word of a foreign beggar over mine? Jonas lowered the rifle until it pointed at the man's chest. I do. The standoff held, 3 heartbeats, maybe 4, then one of Elias's men twitched, shifting his rifle. Jonas fired first. The report split the night, echoing through the valley like thunder. The man dropped backward into the snow, soundless. The second bolted, horse kicking up white dust, fleeing into the dark. Elias stumbled, hand jerking toward his holster, but Jonas was faster. In 2 strides he closed the distance, grabbing him by the coat and shoving him hard against the porch rail. You're done, he growled. You cross this line again, and the ground will keep what's left of you. Elias's breath came ragged. You'll hang for this. Jonas's eyes didn't waver. No, I'll live for it. He released him, and Elias crumpled to the snow, scrambling to his horse with trembling hands. She'll destroy you, he hissed before riding off into the storm. The wind swallowed his voice, and then there was only the quiet, heavy, endless, pure. Jonas stood motionless, chest rising and falling, the rifle slack in his grip. Lian Mei moved toward him slowly, her bare feet sinking into the snow. She touched his sleeve with shaking fingers. You shouldn't have. I had to. You could have died. He looked at her then, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she saw fear behind his calm, not for himself but for her. I couldn't let him take you, he said. Not after everything I didn't save before. Tears blurred her vision. You saved more than you know. The storm raged harder, whipping around them, forcing her to lean closer to be heard. You've given me something no man ever offered, she whispered. Choice. Jonas lowered his head, his breath clouding between them. You shouldn't thank me for doing what's right. I'm not thanking you, she said. I'm asking you to let me stay. He looked at her then as if seeing her fully for the first time, not a refugee, not a burden, but a woman whose will had outlasted the world's cruelty. His throat tightened. You sure? She nodded, snow gathering in her hair like ash. You opened your door once. I'm asking you not to close it again. Jonas exhaled, a long breath that sounded like surrender. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and let his hand linger just long enough for her to know he wouldn't pull away this time. They turned back toward the cabin together. Inside, the fire had dimmed to embers, casting a soft red glow across the walls. Jonas closed the door behind them, sealing out the storm. The room smelled of gunpowder and wood smoke, of endings and beginnings. Lian Mei sat by the hearth, hands trembling from shock, while Jonas set the rifle down on the table. Neither spoke. The silence between them was different now, not the fragile kind that breaks but the kind that binds. After a long while she said, They'll come again, won't they? Maybe not him but others. Probably. And you'll keep fighting? He stared into the flames. Only if I have something worth fighting for. She rose, moving closer until her shadow joined his on the wall. Then you do. Jonas turned. Her face was pale from cold, eyes luminous in the firelight. He hesitated, a man used to losing more than he ever gained, and then quietly he reached for her hand. Her fingers were small, warm against his rough palm. For a moment, neither moved, as if the world had narrowed to that single point of touch. The cabin creaked. The wind howled like memory. Outside the snow kept falling, thick and endless. But inside, warmth grew from something no storm could smother. Jonas's voice came low. You can stay, Lian Mei. As long as you want. Her answer was barely a whisper. Then I'm home. He let out a breath that might have been a prayer. Together they knelt near the fire, feeding it fresh wood until the flames leapt high again, painting their faces gold. For the first time in years Jonas felt alive, not surviving but living. The hours passed gently. The storm outside began to fade, its rage spent against the earth. Lian Mei leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes half closed. Do you think it'll ever stop snowing? She murmured. Maybe not, he said. But we don't have to face it alone. The firelight flickered against the window, catching the faint reflection of 2 figures sitting side by side. Beyond the glass, the snow still whispered, but now it sounded less like sorrow, more like song. When morning came, the valley was washed in silver, quiet as forgiveness. Smoke rose from the chimney, steady and sure. The tracks from the night before had vanished under new snow, as if the earth itself had chosen to forget. Jonas opened the door, stepping into the pale light. The world looked untouched again, like it might allow a second beginning. Lian Mei joined him, her hand finding his. Together they stood in the cold, breathing the same air, their footprints marking the first path of the new day. He looked at her and said softly, "Winter's got a way of showing who you really are." She smiled faintly. "And what did it show you?" "That warmth don't always come from fire." Her laughter was quiet, fragile, beautiful. The wind carried it away across the plain, mingling with the sound of melting snow and far-off ravens calling, the world moving again, slower, kinder. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the past was still out there, dark and waiting. But for now, in that small cabin of light and silence, two souls had found what every storm tries to bury, the simple, stubborn miracle of staying.